By the time Sienna Brooks realized the enormous man in front of her was Nico Valenti, her finger was already pressed against his chest, not hovering near it, not accidentally brushing his jacket. Pressed. Right there. Against the open collar of a black shirt covering a chest that felt less like human anatomy and more like somebody had hidden a concrete wall beneath an expensive suit. And unfortunately, Sienna had already poked him twice. The entire restaurant had gone silent. Not gradually, not politely. It had simply died. 1 second. Glasses were clinking behind the bar, exhausted waiters were arguing over missing tip envelopes, somebody in the kitchen was laughing too loudly, and Tessa Morgan was threatening to personally arrest whoever had stolen the last slice of cheesecake. The next, nothing. Sienna glanced around. 3 waiters were staring at her. 1 busboy had stopped halfway through stacking plates. Tessa stood near the bar with both hands covering her mouth, and Marco De Luca, the tall man who had been speaking to the stranger before Sienna interrupted, had developed the peculiar expression of someone trying very hard not to laugh at a funeral. Sienna looked back at the man beneath her finger. He looked down at her, slowly. His eyes were dark. His jaw was sharp. His shoulders were broad enough to create their own weather system, and his expression suggested he had never once been required to repeat himself to anybody who valued breathing. Sienna smiled. A small one, a cautious one, the kind of smile people used when attempting to negotiate with large animals. Then she removed her finger. Very, very slowly. Perhaps nobody had noticed. A wine glass slipped from someone's hand behind her and shattered. Everyone noticed. Fantastic. 20 minutes earlier, Sienna Brooks had been a completely respectable woman. Mostly. She was 28, curvy, hard-working, chronically underpaid, and wearing a black and pink waitress uniform after surviving 11 hours at Vespa, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. She had smiled, while a businessman snapped his fingers at her. She had apologized to a woman whose complaint appeared to be that her ice was too cold. She had carried 6 plates at once, while a toddler attempted to assassinate her ankles with a toy truck. She had even maintained professionalism when one customer sent his steak back because, apparently, it tasted too much like meat. Sienna deserved a medal. Instead, Tessa had given her a cocktail, then another, which explained how a perfectly reasonable decision, checking next week's employee schedule before going home, had transformed into whatever this was, because there had been a problem. A 6'3" problem, wearing black, standing directly in front of the employee's schedule. Sienna had waited politely. He hadn't moved. She had cleared her throat. Nothing. She had said, "Excuse me." Still nothing. The man had continued speaking quietly to Marco, as though Sienna were decorative furniture. That was approximately when 2 cocktails had filed for control of her decision-making department. And she had approached. Tessa had whispered her name from across the restaurant. Sienna had ignored her. She'd stopped beside the man and looked at the schedule behind him, then at him, then back at the schedule. The sensible option would have been walking around him, but Sienna had been dealing with unreasonable people since 4 o'clock that afternoon, and apparently her patience had officially closed before the restaurant did, so she'd tapped his chest. He'd looked down. Sienna had smiled sweetly. "Could you move?" He hadn't. That should have been her warning. Instead, she had frowned and poked him again, because apparently one mistake was simply not enough information. "You're blocking the schedule." Marco's eyebrows had gone up. Tessa had stopped breathing. The stranger had lowered his gaze towards Sienna's finger. Then he had looked at her face. Sienna, still blissfully unaware that she was making local history, had tilted her head. Being tall doesn't mean you get to become part of the building. Somewhere behind her, someone whispered a prayer. That had been 30 seconds ago. Now Sienna stood in complete silence, wondering why every employee looked as though they'd just watched her slap a tiger. Nico's gaze remained fixed on her. He did not look angry. That somehow made everything worse. Angry men were understandable. They shouted. They threatened. They pointed unnecessarily. This man simply watched. The silence around him seemed trained. Sienna straightened. Well? Nico's eyebrow moved slightly. Marco turned away. His shoulders shook once. Sienna pointed toward the board. I need my schedule. That was when Tessa finally found enough courage to move. She hurried across the restaurant, grabbed Sienna gently by the elbow and leaned close. Sienna. What? Stop. I've stopped. Stop more. Sienna frowned. Tessa's eyes shifted toward Nico, then back. You know who that is? Sienna glanced at him. Handsome? Obviously. Annoyingly enormous? Certainly. Dressed like black clothing had personally sponsored his existence? Definitely. Beyond that? No. Tessa swallowed. That is Nico Valenti. Nothing happened inside Sienna's head. Then, something did. Nico Valenti. Her eyes moved toward the Vespa logo, embossed in gold behind the bar. Then toward the man. Then back toward the logo. Oh. Everyone working at Vespa knew the name Valenti. Nico Valenti owned the restaurant, and the hotel 3 streets away, and several nightclubs, and apparently enough property that Tessa once joked the city should simply start paying him rent. But ownership wasn't why Tessa currently looked ready to climb underneath the nearest table. There were also rumors, the kind of rumors people repeated quietly. Nico Valenti didn't simply own businesses. He controlled an organization. Men with expensive suits visited through private entrances. Politicians suddenly became polite around him. People who cheated Valenti companies occasionally developed urgent desires to relocate very far away. Nobody working at Vespa called him Mafia. Not officially. They preferred phrases like, Mr. Valenti has other interests. Sienna slowly turned back toward him. Nico was still watching her. Her eyes dropped to his chest. The chest she had poked, twice. Perhaps she could move countries. Argentina sounded pleasant. She smiled again. This one had considerably less confidence. In my defense, Marco made a choking sound. Nico looked toward him. Marco immediately became fascinated by the ceiling. Sienna continued. You were blocking it. Tessa closed her eyes. Nico stared at Sienna for another long moment. Then, very quietly, you poked me. Sienna considered denying it. Unfortunately, there were approximately 14 witnesses, and one of them might already have recorded her funeral. I prefer... Redirected, his eyebrow lifted, with your finger. It's a highly advanced hospitality technique. Marco coughed. Definitely laughing now. Sienna looked at him. You're enjoying this far too much. Marco's mouth became completely neutral. I have no idea what you mean. Nico didn't look away from Sienna. Something strange happened then. Very small. So small she nearly missed it. The corner of his mouth shifted. Not quite a smile. More like his face had briefly considered one, before remembering there were witnesses, and because Sienna's survival instincts remained deeply committed to unemployment. She noticed. Oh. Nico's expression flattened immediately. She pointed at him. You almost smiled. Nobody breathed. Marco's eyes widened with delight. Nico's voice became dangerously calm. Did I? Yes. No. You absolutely did. Sienna, Tessa whispered. What? Please develop fear. I have fear. You're pointing at him again. Sienna looked at her hand. She was. She lowered it. Right. Nico's attention shifted over her shoulder, and everything changed. The faint amusement disappeared. His body became still. Not tense. Still. Sienna noticed because 3 seconds earlier she had been studying his face closely enough to accuse him of unauthorized smiling. Now his gaze was focused somewhere behind her. Marco noticed too. His amusement vanished. Nico spoke quietly. Don't turn around. Naturally, Sienna started turning around. Nico's hand closed gently around her wrist. She froze. His grip wasn't painful, but the authority in it went straight through the last traces of alcohol in her bloodstream. Sienna. It was the first time he'd said her name. That should not have done anything strange to her stomach. It did. Don't. Her pulse changed. She looked at him. What is it? Nico's eyes moved past her. Near the employee entrance stood a man Sienna didn't recognize. Gray jacket, dark trousers, one hand tucked inside his coat. Another man had appeared near the kitchen corridor. Sienna's humor faded slightly. Are they customers? We're closed, Marco said. Ah, that seemed important. The man near the kitchen started walking toward them. Nico released Sienna's wrist and stepped slightly in front of her. It was such an instinctive movement that for half a second she didn't understand it. Then she realized. He had placed himself between her and the stranger. Sienna's heart skipped, which was inconvenient, because this was not the appropriate moment to discover that being protected by an intimidatingly handsome criminal was apparently one of her body's secret interests. Nico's voice remained calm. Marco. Marco was already moving. The stranger by the kitchen changed direction, fast, toward Sienna. Nico's hand moved to her waist. Sienna jumped. Excuse, stay behind me. Her eyebrows rose. There it was. The bossiness. The expensive suit had finally revealed its natural habitat. You don't get to order me. The stranger lunged. Everything happened at once. Marco intercepted one man. A chair crashed. Tessa screamed Sienna's name. The second stranger reached inside his jacket. Nico turned, bent, and before Sienna could finish objecting to his tone, the floor disappeared. Her stomach dropped, her feet left the ground, and suddenly the most feared Mafia boss in the city had Sienna Brooks slung over his shoulder. For one full second, her brain refused to process the indignity. Then it processed all of it. Nico! He started walking, fast. Sienna's curls bounced around her face. Her backside was now approximately eye level with half her co-workers. Tessa stared. Marco looked over during what appeared to be a very serious security situation, and somehow still found time to smirk. Sienna slapped one hand against Nico's back. Put me down! No. Her mouth fell open. No, no! I am a person. I noticed. I am not luggage. Luggage is quieter. Tessa made an outrageous snorting sound behind them. Sienna twisted enough to glare at her. Do not laugh. That made Tessa laugh harder. Traitor. Nico carried Sienna toward the private corridor. She kicked one foot. Not violently. Mostly symbolically. My dignity is back there. Your dignity poked a Mafia boss twice. Sienna went still. That was annoyingly difficult to argue with. You're enjoying this. No. You're lying. No. I can hear the smile. There is no smile. You have a very smug shoulder. Nico continued walking. Sienna stared at the back of his jacket. I hope you know I'm leaving a terrible review. You work here. I know people. A sharp crack exploded behind them. The humor vanished. Something punched into the wooden wall beside the corridor entrance. Sienna's breath stopped. A hole appeared in the paneling. For one terrible second, she simply stared. That had been a bullet. Nico's arm tightened securely across the back of her legs, not hurting her, protecting her. Marco. Handled. Nico continued moving. Sienna wasn't protesting anymore. Her fingers had closed around the back of his jacket. The restaurant suddenly felt enormous behind her. Too many doors, too many shadows, too many possibilities. And beneath the fear came a single bewildering thought. Why were those men coming toward her? She was a waitress. She owned 2 respectable dresses, an unreliable toaster, and exactly $17 in emergency cash hidden inside a cereal box. Nobody assassinated women with cereal box savings. Nico pushed through a private door into the underground parking area. 2 black SUVs were waiting. Several men immediately moved toward them. Sienna blinked. Do you just keep men everywhere? Yes, that seems exhausting. One of Nico's security men opened the rear door. Nico finally lowered her. Carefully, very carefully. Her shoes touched concrete. Sienna immediately straightened her uniform and attempted to gather whatever fragments of dignity remained in the parking garage. Nico looked down at her. "You all right?" She opened her mouth with a sarcastic answer ready, then stopped. His expression wasn't amused now. There was genuine concern there. Quiet, controlled, but real. Something softened in her chest, which was absolutely unacceptable after he had just transported her like an oversized sack of flour. "I'll survive." His gaze moved over her face, as though confirming that for himself. Then his eyes dropped, toward her apron. His entire expression sharpened. Sienna followed his gaze. Something black was sticking from the small pocket near her hip. She frowned. "What?" Nico reached toward it, then stopped before touching her. "May I?" The question caught her off guard. After everything that had happened in the previous 3 minutes, apparently the Mafia boss had decided now was the appropriate moment for manners. Sienna pulled the object free herself. A black key card. No logo. No writing. Only a sequence of tiny silver numbers along one edge. She stared at it.
"What is this?"
Nico's face changed. Marco arrived behind them. He saw the card. His expression changed too. Sienna looked between the two men. "Oh, wonderful! Matching mysterious faces!" Nico took the card carefully. "Where did you get this?" "I didn't." His gaze sharpened. "Sienna, do not use the serious voice. I genuinely don't know. When did you put it in your apron?" "I didn't." Marco examined the card from beside Nico. "Elliot." Nico looked at him. Sienna frowned. "Elliot Crane?" Both men turned toward her. She pointed back toward the restaurant. "The accountant? Nervous guy? Always orders sparkling water and then looks guilty about it." Nico stepped closer. "You saw him tonight?" "Of course. He bumped into me before closing." "When?" Sienna thought. "Maybe 40 minutes ago." "What happened?" "Nothing. He nearly knocked a tray out of my hands, grabbed my arm, apologized about 8 times and left." Marco and Nico exchanged one look. Sienna hated that look. Men should not be allowed to exchange entire paragraphs without including the woman standing between them. "What?" Marco reached inside his jacket and checked his phone. Then his face became grim. "Nico!" "What?" "Crane's car was found 15 minutes ago." Sienna swallowed. "And?" Marco looked toward her. There was blood inside. The parking garage suddenly felt colder. Sienna looked at the black card in Nico's hand. Then at the restaurant entrance behind them, a bullet had just gone through a wall where she had been standing. 2 strangers had been moving toward her. A frightened accountant had bumped into her shortly before disappearing. And now, some mysterious card had appeared inside her apron. Nico opened the SUV door. "Get in." Sienna stared at him. There was the commanding voice again. Normally she would have argued. Normally she would have informed him that lifting a woman over his shoulder did not automatically promote him to dictator of her evening. But she looked at the bulletproof SUV, then at the black card. Then toward the distant restaurant door. She climbed inside. Nico followed. Marco shut the door behind them. Sienna sat back against the leather seat as the vehicle began moving. Her heart was still pounding. Nico sat opposite her, broad shoulders filling far too much of the available space. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Sienna narrowed her eyes. "You're not actually taking me home, are you?" Nico looked at her. No, she knew it. "Where are we going?" "My house." Sienna stared. The tipsiness returned just enough to produce one final terrible thought. She pointed at him again. "Let me understand this. I poke you twice. You throw me over your shoulder, and now I'm going home with you?" Nico's gaze dropped to her finger, then slowly returned to her face. "Apparently." Sienna lowered her hand. "Huh." A beat passed. Then she muttered, "Tessa is never going to let me survive this." For the second time that night, Nico Valenti almost smiled. But Sienna saw something else too. He was still holding the mysterious black card. And whatever was written on that card had turned the city's most dangerous man very serious. Sienna had started the evening worrying about next week's work schedule. Now someone had fired a bullet at her. A missing accountant had planted something in her apron, and a mafia boss was taking her to his home because apparently even going to work had become too much adventure. She looked out at the city lights passing beyond the tinted window, then back at Nico. She had absolutely no idea what she'd gotten herself into. But one thing was already painfully clear. Poking Nico Valenti's chest had been the second most dangerous thing she'd done that night. The first was making him curious about her. Sienna Brooks had imagined many possible endings to her Saturday night. Going home, taking off her shoes, eating leftover cheesecake directly from the box, while pretending calories became legally irrelevant after midnight. Perhaps falling asleep with her television still playing. Being transported through the city, inside an armored SUV belonging to Nico Valenti, was not on the list. Neither was sitting opposite the man while he studied a mysterious black card somebody had secretly slipped into her apron. And yet, there she was, one shoe missing, hair beginning to escape its bun, uniform slightly wrinkled, pride critically injured, and the city's most feared mafia boss, sitting across from her like abducting loud waitresses, was simply another administrative responsibility. Sienna glanced toward the tinted window, then at Nico, then back toward the window. She had been quiet for almost 30 seconds, a personal record. Nico seemed to know it. His eyes lifted from the card. Sienna caught him looking. "What?" He said nothing. That was becoming irritating. She folded her arms. "You're doing the face again." His eyebrow moved. Apparently that was the most emotional activity his face permitted after midnight. Sienna clarified that he had approximately 4 faces. The dangerous one, the suspicious one, the one suggesting somebody had disappointed him professionally, and the one he currently wore, which looked like the first 3 had formed a committee. Marco, sitting in the front passenger seat, made a suspicious coughing sound. Nico looked toward him. The coughing stopped. Sienna stared between them. Interesting. Apparently everyone in Nico's world had spent years developing survival instincts. She had misplaced hers somewhere near the second cocktail. The SUV turned through enormous iron gates. Sienna looked outside and forgot her next complaint. The Valenti estate rose at the end of a long private drive surrounded by old trees and immaculate gardens. It wasn't gaudy. That somehow made it more intimidating. No gold lions, no fountains shaped like naked emperors, no giant letter V carved into the lawn, just dark stone, warm lights, tall windows, quiet security, and the unmistakable atmosphere of a place where even the shrubbery probably had background checks. Sienna slowly looked at Nico. "This is your house?" "Yes." She looked outside again. "Are you sure?" Nico frowned. "Pretty sure." That almost made Marco laugh again. Sienna pointed toward the estate. "That is not a house. A house has 3 bedrooms and 1 drawer nobody can open because somebody put batteries in it wrong 10 years ago." Nico said nothing. "That has wings." 2. "Of course you counted." "I own it." She considered that. "Fair." The vehicle stopped beneath a covered entrance. 3 men in dark suits approached immediately. Sienna's gaze moved from one to another. Then she leaned slightly toward Nico. "Do they live here?" "Some." "How many men do you have?" Marco looked over his shoulder. Nico's expression remained perfectly neutral. Sienna realized how that question sounded. Her eyes widened. "Employees." "I meant employees." Marco finally lost the battle. He laughed. Not loudly, but enough. Nico gave him a look. Sienna pointed triumphantly. "See? He understood." Marco immediately faced forward again. The door opened. Nico stepped out first. Sienna followed, and instantly remembered she had only 1 shoe. Her bare foot hit cold stone. She stopped. Nico looked down, then at her, then at the single heel still hanging from her other hand. His eyes narrowed slightly. When did you lose the other one? Sienna looked behind the SUV, as though it might have followed independently. Somewhere between being thrown over your shoulder and discovering people were shooting at me. A security guard moved forward. Nico quietly told him to have someone retrieve it from Vesper. Sienna blinked. That isn't necessary. Nico looked at her bare foot. It is. She opened her mouth. He started walking. Sienna stared after him. That man had weaponized decisiveness. She followed. The entrance hall was enormous without trying to prove it. Dark wood, stone floors, a wide staircase. Old paintings, soft lighting, a chandelier large enough to require its own postal address. Sienna stepped inside and immediately slowed. 6 members of household staff stood nearby. Every one of them straightened when Nico entered. Then they noticed her. That was when Sienna understood how this looked. Their terrifying employer had left his restaurant alone. He had returned after midnight with a curvy waitress in a pink-trimmed uniform, one shoe, messy hair, and a facial expression suggesting she had personally spent the journey criticizing him. Nobody asked questions, but their eyes did. Sienna gave them a small wave. "Good evening," several responded politely. One elderly woman near the staircase studied Sienna from head to toe, not judgmentally, curiously. Then her eyes moved toward Nico. A tiny smile appeared. Nico saw it. His expression warned her not to begin. That meant. Sienna immediately liked the woman. Her name was Rosa Bellini. She had managed the Valenti household for 22 years and possessed the extraordinary confidence of a woman who had apparently stopped being intimidated by Nico somewhere around his teenage years. Nico explained that Sienna would stay in the East guest room. Rosa looked at Sienna, then at him, then at Sienna again. Sienna could practically hear the assumptions assembling. Before those assumptions could develop furniture, Sienna corrected the situation. She was there because someone had tried to shoot her. Rosa's expression changed instantly. Concern replaced amusement. Nico gave Sienna a look. Apparently he'd been planning a gentler explanation. Sienna shrugged. She had never been gifted at mystery. Unless the mystery involved why a customer thought clicking fingers summoned waitresses. Rosa took charge. Food, clean clothes, tea. Sienna politely rejected tea and asked if there were pancakes. Nico closed his eyes briefly. Rosa smiled. Of course. Sienna pointed toward her. Finally. Someone with priorities. Nico removed his jacket. Sienna noticed. She wished she hadn't. Without the jacket, the black shirt beneath fitted his shoulders far too well, and the open collar exposed just enough of the chest she'd assaulted earlier to remind her exactly how firm it had been. She looked away. Immediately. Too immediately. Marco noticed. Of course Marco noticed. Sienna saw his expression. She narrowed her eyes. He looked innocent. Nobody in the Valenti organization looked less innocent than Marco attempting innocence. Nico placed the black card on a table near the foyer. The atmosphere shifted again. Marco moved closer. The humor didn't vanish, but something colder entered beneath it. They needed to know what Elliot Crane had given her. Sienna followed them into a private study. She stopped inside the doorway. Apparently, Nico's idea of a study involved enough books to intimidate a university. There were shelves to the ceiling, a fireplace, 2 leather chairs, a desk built like somebody expected international treaties to be signed on it. Sienna glanced around. "Do you actually read all these?" "Yes." She looked genuinely surprised. Nico noticed. "That surprises you. You look like you'd make books nervous." Marco turned his face away again. Nico ignored him. Sienna walked toward the desk. The card sat beneath a brass lamp. Tiny numbers ran along one edge. Nico explained that it wasn't a standard security pass. It appeared customized, encrypted. Marco had already messaged one of their technical people. They would know more by morning. Sienna stared at it. Something bothered her. She couldn't explain what. The numbers seemed familiar. Not the sequence itself. The pattern. She leaned closer. Nico watched. You recognize it? Maybe. That got his full attention. Sienna lifted the card, but didn't touch the magnetic strip. The first numbers read 12, 7, 19, 4, then 9, 17, 11. Her brows pulled together. She could almost see something. Tables, a dining room, white cloth, wine glasses. Sienna suddenly looked up. These are table numbers. Marco frowned. Nico didn't. He simply waited. Sienna began mapping them mentally. Table 12 near the west window. 7 beneath the central chandelier. 19 beside the private bar. 4 near the kitchen entrance. 9, 17, 11. She knew those tables, because she had spent 2 years navigating between them, while wealthy people moved chairs into walkways, for no identifiable reason. The numbers weren't random. They formed a route through Vesper. From the front dining room, past the bar, toward the service corridor. Ending near, Sienna stopped. What? She looked at Nico. Your private office. Silence. Marco immediately picked up his phone. Nico's gaze sharpened. Sienna explained. If someone followed those table numbers physically. The route ended at the office Nico used whenever he visited Vesper. The final number wasn't a table, it was room 11, a staff storage room beside Nico's office. Nobody used it anymore, because the lock had jammed months ago. Except, Sienna had seen Victor entering it twice. She had assumed he stored invoices there. Nico and Marco exchanged another silent conversation. Sienna pointed between them. No. Both looked at her. You two need to stop doing that. Doing what? Marco asked. Talking with your eyebrows. Marco blinked. We aren't. You absolutely are. I feel excluded. Nico's mouth moved. Almost. Sienna caught it again. She pointed. There. His expression immediately flattened. I didn't smile. You keep saying that, like witnesses aren't available. Rosa entered carrying a tray. Pancakes. Sienna abandoned the argument with supernatural speed. Nico stared. Marco stared. Sienna sat down. What? Rosa placed the plate in front of her. Sienna thanked her with sincere emotional depth. Then she noticed Nico was still standing. You're not eating? No. She cut into the pancake. That explains the personality. Marco inhaled sharply through his nose. Nico's stare could probably freeze bank accounts. Sienna ate anyway. Something strange happened over the next 20 minutes. She relaxed. Not completely. There were armed men outside. A missing accountant. A mysterious card. Someone had fired at her. Any rational person should have been terrified. Sienna was terrified, but fear had never made her quiet. It made her notice things. The way Nico always positioned himself, where he could see the door. The way Marco checked his phone without appearing distracted. The way neither of them interrupted when she explained the restaurant layout. They listened. Actually listened. Nobody dismissed her because she carried plates for a living. Nobody told her the men would handle it. And when she couldn't remember whether Elliot had touched her apron before or after dropping his phone, Nico didn't pressure. He asked her to think slowly. Sienna remembered. Elliot had bumped into her near the service station. His left hand caught her elbow. His right hand moved near her waist. At the time, she thought he'd been trying to steady her tray. Now, he had probably been placing the card. She also remembered something else. Victor Santoro had been watching. Not obviously. Victor never did anything obviously. But after Elliot left, Victor had asked Sienna whether the accountant had said anything strange. She had joked that Elliot always seemed one overdue invoice away from a nervous breakdown. Victor laughed, then told her to forget about it. Nico became very still. Sienna noticed. That's one of the faces. He looked at her. The dangerous one. Marco quietly said, Victor had worked for Nico for almost 8 years. Trusted access. Restaurant finances. Personnel records. Private reservations. Delivery schedules. If Victor were involved, the problem was larger than Elliot. Nico didn't jump to conclusions. He wanted proof. Sienna respected that. She didn't say so. Respecting Nico Valenti felt like the beginning of a slippery slope. First respect, then admiration. Then she'd start thinking his ridiculous shoulders were attractive. That tragedy had already occurred, unfortunately. Sienna finished eating. Rosa returned with folded clothes, a soft t-shirt, loose trousers, slippers. Sienna stood. Nico told her Rosa would show her upstairs. She nodded, then paused by the door. "Nico?" He looked up. She hesitated. The jokes briefly disappeared. "Do you really think whoever shot at me knows where I live?" "Yes." No comforting lie. Just truth. Sienna swallowed. "And Tessa. We'll have someone watching her apartment tonight." That startled her. She hadn't asked. He had already considered it. The knot beneath Sienna's ribs loosened slightly. "Thank you." Nico simply nodded. No smugness, no expectation. She turned away, then remembered something. "And if anyone finds my shoe..." Nico stared. Sienna maintained perfect seriousness. "It was expensive." Marco looked at the ceiling. Nico's jaw moved. Sienna left before he could respond. Upstairs, Rosa showed her a guest suite, bigger than Sienna's apartment. Bedroom, sitting area, private bathroom, balcony overlooking the gardens. Sienna stared, then walked back toward the door. Rosa pointed to the lock. "You control it." Sienna's hand paused. That detail mattered. More than the expensive furniture, more than the enormous bed, more than the security. Nico had told the truth. The guards outside were protecting the room, not imprisoning her inside it. Sienna locked the door, then unlocked it, just to make sure. She stood there for a moment, quiet. Her phone buzzed. 27 messages from Tessa. Sienna opened the first. "Are you alive?" The second. "Did he really carry you out?" The third. "Answer before I plan your funeral or wedding." Sienna laughed despite herself. She typed that she was alive. Then Tessa called immediately. Sienna answered. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. Most of it involved Tessa screaming questions. Yes, Nico had carried her. No, nothing romantic had happened. Yes, his house was enormous. No, Sienna did not know whether he had a girlfriend. Why was that relevant? Tessa informed her it was relevant to journalism. Sienna ended the call. She changed, washed her face, released her hair, then walked toward the enormous bed. She should have slept. Instead, she found herself thinking about Nico. Not the Mafia rumors, not the money, not the estate. The way he'd asked permission before touching the card in her apron. The way he'd arranged protection for Tessa without being asked. The way he'd given Sienna a door she could lock from the inside. Those things were inconvenient, very inconvenient, because it was considerably easier to dislike a terrifying Mafia boss when he behaved like one. Downstairs, Nico Valenti sat alone in his study, staring at the black access card. Marco stood near the desk. Neither man was laughing now, because one additional piece of information had arrived. Elliot Crane's abandoned car had been searched. The blood inside matched Elliot's type. But there was something else. A handwritten note had been found beneath the driver's seat. Only 4 words. "The girl has everything." Marco looked toward the ceiling, toward the guest room where Sienna was currently sleeping. Nico's expression hardened. Someone had just transformed a waitress into the most valuable witness in the city. And Sienna Brooks, the woman who had spent the evening poking dangerous men and complaining about missing shoes, didn't know half of what she was carrying. Sienna woke the next morning to sunlight, birds, and approximately 4 seconds of peaceful confusion. She opened her eyes. Beautiful ceiling, soft sheets, enormous room, no familiar traffic noise outside. For one blissful moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then her brain returned with receipts. Mafia boss, chest poke, shoulder, bullet, missing accountant, mysterious card. Sienna pulled the blanket over her face. Wonderful. Most people woke with responsibilities. She had apparently woken inside a crime novel. Her phone showed 8:30. There were another 31 messages from Tessa. Sienna ignored them, in the interests of preserving what remained of her mental health. She showered, dressed in the clothes Rosa had provided, then went downstairs. The estate was different in daylight, less intimidating, still enormous, but warm. Sunlight crossed the floors. Someone had opened French doors toward the garden. Fresh flowers sat near the windows. Sienna had expected a Mafia mansion to look like every room was waiting for someone to confess. Instead, it smelled like coffee and bread. That was disappointing. She had prepared herself emotionally for gargoyles. A guard stood at the end of the hallway. Sienna nodded. He nodded. She walked past, then stopped, turned, looked at him. He remained professional. "You're assigned to me?" "Yes, ma'am." "What's your name?" "Daniel." Sienna considered him. He was enormous. Shaved head, black suit, expression like a parking ticket. "You don't look like Daniel." The guard blinked. "What do I look like?" Sienna studied him. "Kevin." He stared. "My name is Daniel." "That's unfortunate." Then she continued walking. Behind her, Daniel remained completely still for several seconds. By the time Sienna found the breakfast room, Nico was already there. Of course he was. She suspected Nico woke before sunrise, simply so Dawn understood who was in charge. He sat at the end of a long table, wearing a black shirt with the sleeves pushed slightly up his forearms. A tablet lay beside his coffee. Marco sat opposite him. Rosa was directing staff near the sideboard. Sienna entered. Marco immediately smiled. Nico looked up, and froze for perhaps half a second. Sienna noticed. She wasn't wearing anything dramatic. Soft cream trousers, a fitted blue blouse Rosa had apparently selected from an emergency guest wardrobe. Her hair was loose. No makeup, except what survived inside her handbag. Yet Nico looked at her slightly longer than necessary. Sienna immediately decided to enjoy that. "Good morning," Marco greeted her. Nico nodded. Sienna stared at the table. Eggs, fruit, toast, bacon, pastries, coffee. Enough breakfast for a football team. She sat beside Marco. Nico looked at her. "There are 12 empty chairs. Yes, you chose that one." "Yes." Marco slowly stopped chewing. Sienna smiled at Nico. "Does it bother you?" "No." "Good." She stole a piece of bacon from Marco's plate. Marco stared at his plate, then at her. "Was that mine?" "Not anymore." Nico lowered his tablet. The morning was improving rapidly. Sienna reached for coffee. A staff member poured it. She thanked him. Nico watched this small exchange, then continued reading. Sienna studied him. He had one mug. Black coffee. No sugar. No cream. No breakfast. She narrowed her eyes. "You don't eat?" "I eat." "When?" "When I'm hungry." She looked at his coffee. "That isn't food." "I know. Are you sure?" Nico finally looked at her. Sienna stirred sugar into her cup. "You have the personality of a man running entirely on caffeine and unresolved childhood expectations." Marco coughed violently. Nico turned toward him. Marco raised both hands. "Wrong pipe." "Obviously." Sienna's eyes landed on Nico's shirt. Black. Again. She looked at his trousers. Black. His watch. Dark metal. Shoes. Black. "Do you own colors?" Nico stared. "Yes." "Name one." "Gray." Sienna closed her eyes. "That's not a color in your world. That's black with low self-esteem." Marco pushed his plate away, because eating had become hazardous. Nico watched her. Then, unexpectedly, answered, "I own blue socks." Silence. Sienna blinked. Marco blinked. Nico took a sip of coffee. Sienna leaned forward. "You're joking." "No."
Actual blue?
"Dark blue." She pointed at him. I knew there was rebellion somewhere, and there it was again, barely visible, that tiny movement at the corner of his mouth. This time, Sienna didn't expose him. She simply smiled into her coffee. The morning shifted toward business after breakfast. Nico's technical specialist arrived. His name was Adrian Holt. Young, thin, glasses, the sort of man who looked completely out of place among Nico's broad-shouldered security team, and therefore probably knew how to destroy somebody's financial life using 3 keystrokes. Adrian connected the black card to an isolated computer. The encryption was sophisticated. Not impossible, but layered. The table number sequence Sienna recognized functioned as the first key. They entered it. 1 layer opened. A second prompt appeared. 7 blank spaces. Sienna stared. Nico looked at her. She immediately held up both hands. "Don't look at me. I work with menus, not espionage." Adrian examined the program. The second code appeared tied to Vesper's internal system. 7 characters. Possibly an employee ID. Possibly a reservation code. Possibly something location-specific. Sienna paced. She hated puzzles she couldn't immediately bully into submission. The first code came from table numbers. Why? Because Elliot knew whoever found the card would need intimate knowledge of Vesper. Or he wanted Sienna specifically to solve it. That idea bothered her. Why her? She was one waitress among dozens. Then she remembered. 2 weeks earlier, Elliot had spent nearly an hour sitting alone at table 17. Sienna served him. He looked distracted. He'd asked strange questions. How long had Sienna worked there? Who handled schedules? Who could access old reservations? At the time, she assumed he was making awkward conversation. Maybe he wasn't. Sienna told Nico. Marco's expression grew serious. Nico asked whether Elliot ever requested her employee number. No. But Sienna stopped. A memory returned. Elliot once paid his bill with cash, then deliberately left the receipt behind. On the back, he'd written something. Sienna hadn't thought about it, because she'd thrown it away. She remembered the number, though. Waitresses remembered numbers. Tips, tables, bills, orders. It had been 7 digits. Adrian entered it. Nothing. Sienna frowned, then realized. That wasn't the number. Elliot had written 4827-719. Different spacing, she told Adrian. He tried again. The screen changed. A file directory appeared. Silence entered the room. Dozens of folders, transfers, contracts, invoices, photographs, names. Adrian began opening them. The first records showed money moving out of several Valenti-owned companies. Not enormous sums individually, enough to be overlooked. 27,000 here, 43,000 there, 16, 31, repeated for years. Together, millions. Marco swore quietly. Nico didn't. That was worse. He stared at the screen. Still, Sienna watched his face change. Not anger. Calculation. Every business listed had one administrative connection. Vesper's management office. Victor Santoro. But there were other names too. Managers, suppliers, accountants. One file contained payment records to companies associated with the rival Marchetti family. Sienna knew the Marchetti name. Everyone did. It appeared in newspapers alongside words like construction, ports, and philanthropy, and whispered alongside considerably less charitable words. Nico stood. The room changed with him. Sienna saw it. This was the man everyone feared. Not because he shouted. Because when Nico Valenti stopped moving, other people started. Marco immediately began making calls. Adrian copied files. Security teams received instructions. Sienna sat quietly. For once. Then she noticed something. The dates. Every major transfer occurred 1 or 2 days before something happened to Nico's businesses. A warehouse inspection, a truck seizure, a cancelled contract, a police raid, a rival bid. Someone wasn't only stealing money, they were selling information. Sienna pointed this out. Everyone stopped. She felt suddenly self-conscious. Nico asked her to explain. She did. The transfers were too neat. If Victor wanted money, why pay rivals? Because the money wasn't the goal. It was proof of cooperation. Payment for leaked schedules, routes, personnel, business plans. Adrian checked. Sienna was right. The dates aligned. Marco looked at her differently. Not like a protected civilian, like someone useful. Sienna sat back. Well, Nico's eyes remained on her. What? She smiled. I'd like my promotion now. Marco stared. Nico almost looked confused. Promotion? Yes. Lead investigator? No. Deputy lead investigator? No. Consulting genius? No. Fine. Senior waitress with criminal-adjacent responsibilities. Nico pinched the bridge of his nose. Sienna grinned. She liked making him do that. It felt like a measurable achievement. The files contained another clue, a list of private Vesper reservations. One name appeared repeatedly. Lorenzo Marchetti. Every meeting occurred on nights when Victor personally managed the restaurant, but the reservations had been hidden under false names. Elliot had apparently discovered them. That explained his fear. He'd found evidence that Victor was feeding information to Nico's rivals. But something still didn't fit. Why give Sienna the card instead of Nico? Why not send it directly? Nico answered that himself. Because Elliot didn't trust anyone close to Nico. Maybe he didn't know how deep the betrayal went. Sienna considered that, then realized something more unsettling. If Elliot chose her because she was outside Nico's organization, then whoever was betraying Nico might be someone Nico trusted deeply. Not merely Victor. Nico understood the implication. So did Marco. The room became quiet. Sienna looked between them. Suddenly the breakfast jokes seemed far away. Then Nico's phone rang. He answered, listened. His face hardened. When the call ended, he looked at Sienna. Elliot's blood had been confirmed in the abandoned car, but investigators had found no body. More importantly, a traffic camera captured Elliot leaving the vehicle alive. He'd been forced into another car. Someone had him. Sienna's stomach tightened. Nico told Marco to find the second vehicle. Marco left. Adrian continued working. Sienna stayed seated. Her fingers curled around the edge of the table. Nico noticed. You don't have to stay involved. She looked at him. That irritated her. Not because he was wrong, because part of her wanted to accept. Go home. Pretend none of this existed. Return to complaining about cold fries and customers who believed ranch dressing was a constitutional right. But Elliot had chosen her. Someone had nearly killed her because of what he'd done. And now Elliot might still be alive. Sienna lifted her chin. No. Nico watched. No what? No, I'm not leaving. His gaze remained steady. Sienna, you said I could choose. He stopped. She reminded him that he had given her a door she controlled. Choice went both ways. If she chose to help, then he didn't get to turn protective and irritating simply because things became uncomfortable. Nico stared at her. Sienna held the stare. Marco wasn't there to enjoy it. Tragic. Finally, Nico nodded. One condition. She narrowed her eyes. What? You don't leave this house alone. She considered arguing, then remembered the bullet. Fine. And you tell me before doing anything connected to Elliot. Fine. And don't get greedy. His mouth almost moved again. Sienna caught it. They had an agreement. At least, Sienna thought they did. Neither of them knew that within 48 hours, she would violate nearly every sensible part of it. By noon, Sienna had discovered 3 important facts about living temporarily inside Nico Valenti's estate. First, there was always a guard nearby. Second, Nico's refrigerator contained enough food to survive a minor apocalypse. Third, every person working in the house had already heard about the chest incident. Nobody admitted it. Nobody needed to. Sienna could tell. A maid saw her approaching Nico in the hallway and immediately found something fascinating on the opposite wall. 2 guards exchanged looks when Sienna poked one finger into the air while explaining a point. Rosa had begun smiling whenever Nico and Sienna entered the same room. Sienna hated all of them. Affectionately. Mostly. The problem was clothing. Her waitress uniform was being cleaned. Rosa's borrowed outfit was comfortable, but Sienna had nothing suitable if she remained longer. Nico suggested having clothes delivered. Sienna refused. He suggested sending Rosa with measurements. Sienna refused again. Nico asked why. Because she did not trust a stranger to buy jeans for a plus-size woman. That required experience. Measurements lied. Brands lied. Mirrors occasionally participated. Nico listened to this explanation with the solemn expression of a man receiving classified intelligence. Then told Marco to arrange a private shopping appointment. Sienna stared. "You're coming." Nico looked up. "No, you caused this. I didn't remove your clothes." Sienna froze. Marco froze. Nico realized what he'd said. Silence. Then Sienna's eyes narrowed with delight. "Nico Valenti." His jaw tightened. "Don't." "Oh, I'm absolutely going to. That was not what I meant." Marco stood. "I should leave." Sienna pointed at him. "No. Witness." Marco sat back down. Nico closed the folder in front of him. Sienna smiled like sunlight weaponized. The feared Nico Valenti made a bedroom joke. "I did not. You did accidentally. That is worse." "I agree." He stared. She stared. Marco stared at nothing. 10 minutes later, Nico agreed to accompany her shopping. Not because Sienna had won. He made this clear. Sienna accepted his surrender gracefully. The boutique occupied the private upper floor of a luxury department store. Nico had apparently called ahead. There were no other customers. Sienna found this ridiculous. She told him normal people shopped around strangers. Nico told her strangers were currently a security problem. She told him billionaires had ruined errands. Marco walked behind them, enjoying himself again. 2 guards remained near the elevator. Sienna entered the fitting area. A stylist appeared. Polite, professional. Immediately understood that Sienna wanted flattering clothes without being disguised beneath enough fabric to cover a sedan. Sienna liked her. Nico waited on a sofa outside. He looked deeply uncomfortable. That improved Sienna's mood considerably. The first outfit was casual. Jeans. Blouse. Nico approved with a nod. Sienna returned inside. The second was a green dress. Elegant. Fitted at the waist. Soft around her curves. She stepped out. Nico looked up and forgot to behave normally. His gaze stopped. Just stopped. Sienna felt heat crawl up her neck. Marco saw everything. Naturally. Sienna turned slightly. "Well?" Nico's voice sounded lower. "It's fine." Sienna stared. "Fine?" She looked at the stylist. Then Marco. Then back at Nico. "Fine?" Nico realized his error. "It looks good." Sienna folded her arms. "That's better." Marco studied the ceiling with the reverence of a cathedral visitor. The stylist smiled. Sienna disappeared behind the curtain. Nico looked at Marco. Marco immediately raised both hands. He had said nothing. That was exactly the problem. The next outfit was burgundy. Nico's face became even less useful. Sienna decided she liked shopping. Then, the salesman arrived. His name was Julian. Tall, charming, far too enthusiastic about helping. He brought shoes, complimented Sienna's dress, told her burgundy suited her complexion. Sienna thanked him. Nico became silent. Not normal Nico silent. Different silent. Sienna noticed instantly. Julian returned with another pair of heels. Bent to place them near Sienna, suggested a matching clutch. Nico's eyes followed him. Sienna looked at Marco. Marco was biting the inside of his cheek. Interesting. Very interesting. Sienna asked Julian whether he thought the green or burgundy dress looked better. Julian chose burgundy. Nico's jaw tightened. Sienna nearly laughed. She asked Julian why. He began describing the waistline. Nico stood. Marco looked delighted. Nico walked toward them. He informed Julian that they would take both. Sienna blinked. I haven't decided. You like both. That is not the point. Nico looked at Julian. Julian sensed danger without understanding its source. He backed away politely. Sienna's eyes widened. When Julian was safely across the room, she turned toward Nico. Were you jealous? No. Fast answer. Too fast. Sienna smiled. You were. No. Your jaw was doing something. My jaw was existing. Violently. Marco made a sound that could have been a cough. Nico stared at Sienna. She leaned closer. You didn't like him complimenting me. I didn't care. Wonderful. She called Julian back. Nico's head turned immediately. Sienna burst out laughing. Even Marco laughed. Nico looked between them. I regret bringing both of you. Sienna patted his arm. You didn't bring me. I required your attendance. That wasn't helping. But the tension changed. For the first time, Sienna saw something unmistakably personal beneath Nico's composure. Not ownership, not anger, interest, real interest. And that was considerably more dangerous than jealousy, because she felt it too. The attraction had existed since the restaurant. Physical, obvious, annoying. But this was different. Nico noticed her moods, her jokes, her habits. He remembered she hated high-necked blouses because she felt trapped inside them. He quietly rejected a pair of shoes because Sienna had mentioned her feet hurting after long shifts. He told the stylist to include practical flats without making a performance of generosity. Small things. Sienna noticed small things too. That was unfortunate. They left the boutique, carrying enough bags to make Sienna uncomfortable. She insisted on paying for some herself. Nico didn't argue. Another surprise. He simply covered what his security situation had required. The rest, hers. Sienna appreciated that more than she wanted to admit. They reached the private elevator. Then Marco's phone began vibrating. He looked at the screen. His expression changed. Nico saw it. What? Marco handed him the phone. Sienna watched Nico's eyes move, then harden. What happened? Neither answered immediately. That meant she definitely wanted to know. Nico passed her the phone. A photograph filled the screen. Sienna, over Nico's shoulder, at Vesper, her curls hanging down, one hand gripping his jacket, her expression outraged. Nico walking calmly toward the private exit. Sienna stared, then laughed. She couldn't help it. The photo was catastrophic. She looked like an angry decorative handbag. Marco showed her the headline. Mystery woman leaves Vesper with Nico Valenti after midnight. Sienna laughed harder. Nico did not. Marco scrolled. There were already dozens of posts. Some claimed she was Nico's secret girlfriend. Others said she'd been drunk. One anonymous account claimed Sienna had attacked Nico before being taken away. Sienna wiped tears from her eyes. Then Marco found another post. He stopped laughing. The headline read, Valenti waitress stole confidential records before private night with boss. Sienna's laughter faded. The article contained specific details. Her name, job, approximate shift time, the fact that she had accessed the employee schedule, the black apron she wore, even the corridor where Nico's office was located. Details not visible in the photograph. Details only someone inside Vesper would know. Nico took the phone back. His face became unreadable. Sienna felt something unpleasant twist in her stomach. Someone was preparing a story, not merely gossip. A narrative. Drunk waitress. Secret affair. Stolen files. That way, if Sienna later accused Victor or anyone else of conspiracy, she would already look compromised. Marco realized the same thing. The post had been uploaded from an anonymous account created that morning. They could trace it. Maybe. But whoever did this understood publicity. Sienna stared through the elevator doors. Her humor hadn't disappeared. It had sharpened. So that's the game. Nico looked at her. They want me ridiculous. Not dead. Not yet. Ridiculous. Untrustworthy. A tipsy waitress who slept with her boss and stole files afterward. If that version spread first, the truth would have to fight uphill. Nico told Marco to have the story removed. Sienna stopped him. Why? Because removing one post wouldn't remove the rumor. And if Nico used influence to erase it, people would assume it was true. Nico studied her. Sienna had dealt with restaurant gossip for years. Different scale. Same disease. You didn't kill gossip by chasing every whisper. You made the whisper boring. She suggested doing nothing publicly. Nico hated that. She could tell. But he listened. Then her phone rang. Tessa. Sienna answered. Tessa did not say hello. She screamed. You're trending. Sienna held the phone away from her ear. Marco laughed again. Nico looked exhausted with everyone. Tessa had already read the comments. All of them. Apparently someone online wanted to know which perfume Sienna wore, because touching Nico Valenti's chest and surviving qualified as a product endorsement. Another commenter wanted instructions. Another claimed Sienna was a hero for women who liked men, built like tax problems. Sienna laughed. Nico's eyes narrowed. Tessa continued. Vespa staff had begun calling Nico chest guy. Sienna stopped breathing. Marco bent at the waist. Nico's face became terrifyingly blank. Tessa heard silence. Oh no, his chest guy there. Sienna ended the call. Immediately. Too late. Nico looked at her. Sienna gave him her sweetest smile. You heard nothing. Chest guy. Not my work. Marco walked ahead, because dignity had become impossible. Sienna followed. Nico remained beside her. For several steps, nothing. Then, quietly, built like tax problems. Sienna choked. He had heard that too. She looked at him. Nico's face remained solemn. Sienna laughed so hard she nearly dropped a shopping bag. For one ridiculous minute, the conspiracy disappeared. The threats disappeared. The leaked photo disappeared. There was only Nico Valenti, pretending he hadn't made a joke. While Sienna laughed beside him, and Nico realized something dangerous. He liked the sound. Too much. The next 2 days became strangely domestic, which should have been impossible. Sienna was living temporarily inside a Mafia boss's estate because someone had attempted to murder her. Yet somehow, she developed a routine. Breakfast with Nico and Marco. Investigation meetings. Phone calls with Tessa. Occasional arguments with security. Long walks through the garden when confinement became irritating. And guards. Always guards. Sienna found one outside the breakfast room, one near the library, one near the garden, one at the end of the upstairs hallway. She began naming them. Daniel remained Kevin. Daniel objected, frequently. Sienna ignored him. Another guard named Matteo had impressive eyebrows. He became Eyebrows. A third, gigantic man named Salvatore, became Cupcake. Nobody understood why. Sienna refused to explain. Within 24 hours, the entire security team knew their unofficial names. Marco encouraged this criminal behavior. Nico did not, at least, publicly. Once, Sienna caught him looking at Cupcake after she called the guard by his new name. Nico's mouth twitched. Sienna saw it. She pointed. He walked away. The investigation progressed more slowly. Adrian confirmed someone inside Vespa had leaked the photograph. Security metadata led back to management access. Victor claimed his credentials had been compromised. Plausible. Annoyingly plausible. Nico refused to accuse him without stronger proof. Sienna understood. Victor had been loyal for years, or appeared loyal. Still, her instincts disliked him. Victor called several times to check on her. Too concerned, too polished. He apologized for the leaked photograph. Promised to protect her job, insisted the restaurant stood behind her. Sienna thanked him, then hung up, and told Nico Victor sounded like a man rehearsing for a commercial. Nico asked whether that was evidence. No. Then, it irritates me. Nico stared. She shrugged. Women's intuition. That's not admissible. Neither are half your employees, probably. Marco laughed. Nico didn't dignify it. Then came the shoes. Sienna's missing heel returned from Vesper. Clean, placed inside a box, strap repaired. Sienna found it outside her room. She stared. Rosa claimed she hadn't done it. Marco claimed innocence. Sienna immediately knew. Nico was in his study. She walked in without knocking. He looked up. She placed the shoe on his desk. "You repaired my heel." Nico glanced at it. "Someone did." "You." "No." "Who?" Silence. Sienna smiled. "You." Nico returned to his paperwork. She stood there. He ignored her. She continued standing. Eventually, he looked up. "What?" That was nice. His expression changed slightly. He wasn't good with compliments. "Interesting." Sienna moved closer. "Thank you. You needed shoes. I own others. This one was broken. You remembered." Nico stopped. There. That was the moment. No joke. No deflection. Just something quiet between them. Sienna suddenly became extremely aware of how close she stood. Nico's gaze dropped briefly toward her mouth, then returned to her eyes. Her heartbeat changed. He stood. Slowly. Sienna's breath caught. The air became different, closer, warmer. For once, she had nothing clever to say, which was probably how Nico knew the situation had become serious. Then Marco walked in, stopped, looked at Nico, looked at Sienna, looked at the shoe on the desk. His eyebrows rose. Sienna immediately stepped back. Nico's jaw tightened. Marco apologized. He did not sound sorry. At all. Sienna escaped with her dignity, at approximately 17% functionality. That evening, Victor called, not through his normal number, a private one. Sienna was alone in the library. At least, she believed she was. Daniel Kevin stood somewhere outside. Victor sounded frightened, not polished this time, breathless. He told Sienna Elliot was alive. She sat up. Victor claimed Elliot contacted him. He was hiding. He had more evidence. Evidence that someone inside Nico's organization was involved. Someone close. Sienna immediately asked why Victor wasn't telling Nico. Victor said Elliot refused. He believed Nico's phones were compromised. He would meet only Sienna. At Vesper. After midnight. Sienna's instincts split directly down the middle. One side screamed trap. The other whispered, what if Elliot really was alive? What if waiting got him killed? She told Victor she needed time, then hung up. The correct decision was obvious. Find Nico. Tell him. Let trained professionals handle it. Sienna stood, walked toward the library door, stopped. She remembered the anonymous post. The internal leak. Elliot's fear. The phrase inside his note. The girl has everything. Maybe he had chosen her specifically because he trusted nobody else. If she told Nico, and the traitor was close to Nico, Elliot might disappear permanently. Sienna hated that this reasoning made sense. It made stupid decisions much easier when they arrived wearing logical shoes. She decided to go, just to see, which was how disasters always introduced themselves. Sienna needed to escape the estate. Easy, except for the guards. She tried the east hallway.
Kevin! She turned. Garden. Cupcake.
Kitchen entrance. Eyebrows. She stared at him. He stared back. Don't you people have hobbies? Eyebrows said nothing. Sienna walked away. Plan B. She returned upstairs. Changed into dark jeans. Comfortable shoes. A coat. Tied her hair back. Then spent 10 minutes examining the estate from a guest balcony. There was a service staircase near the east wing. She'd noticed staff using it. It led toward the kitchen garden. From there, a side path reached a small vehicle gate. Sienna smiled. Genius. She descended the service stairs, passed through a laundry corridor, opened a back door, stepped outside. No guard. Victory. She crossed the garden, reached a hedge, turned the corner, and nearly walked into Rosa. The older woman stood there, holding a basket of herbs. Sienna froze. Rosa looked at her coat. her shoes, the suspiciously determined expression. Then toward the house. "Sneaking out?" Sienna opened her mouth. Rosa waited. Sienna sighed. "Potentially." Rosa nodded thoughtfully, then reached into her basket. Sienna expected a phone, a weapon, a lecture. Instead, Rosa handed her an umbrella. "It's going to rain." Sienna stared. "You're helping me?" "No, you just gave me an umbrella. I dislike wet furniture." Sienna blinked. Rosa walked past, then paused, without looking back. "If you're doing something foolish, sweetheart, at least do it quickly enough that Mr. Valenti can rescue you before dinner." Sienna stared after her. That woman was terrifying. Sienna reached the vehicle gate. It opened for deliveries. She slipped through while a van entered. 5 minutes later, she called a rideshare from 2 streets away. At the estate, Nico discovered she was missing 11 minutes later. He entered the security room. Marco was already there. 4 guards stood in varying stages of humiliation. Nico looked at the screens. Then at them. How? Nobody spoke. He looked toward Daniel. How many people were assigned to her? 4. Nico stared. Daniel looked like he wished bullets were involved instead. Marco tried to maintain professionalism. Failed slightly. Nico turned. 4 trained men. Silence. 1 waitress. More silence. And you lost the waitress. Daniel swallowed. She used the service corridors. Nico closed his eyes. Very slowly. Marco looked down. Nico opened them. Find her. Then Rosa entered. Everyone turned. She calmly explained that Sienna had left approximately 15 minutes earlier. Nico stared. You saw her? Yes. And you let her leave? Rosa looked offended. She is 28, Nico. Not 12. She is being hunted. I reminded her about the rain. Marco turned away. Nico looked as though his soul had temporarily left his body. Rosa told him. Sienna had been worried about something. Probably Elliot. That was enough. Nico called her. No answer. Again. Nothing. 3rd time. Voicemail. His expression changed. Marco stopped finding anything amusing. They traced Sienna's phone, moving toward downtown, toward Vesper. Nico grabbed his jacket. Marco followed. Rosa watched them leave. Then quietly muttered, "Before dinner." Sienna reached Vesper at 12:23. The restaurant was dark. Victor had told her to use the employee entrance. She did. Immediately, she regretted everything. Too quiet. No Elliot. No staff. Only dim emergency lights. Sienna stepped inside. Victor? Nothing. She walked farther. The wine cellar door stood open. That was wrong. Victor hated leaving doors open. He had once lectured an entire shift because someone left the linen closet ajar. Sienna stopped. Every instinct screamed. Leave. She turned. The employee door slammed behind her. Locked. Sienna closed her eyes. Of course. Victor stepped from the corridor. Not frightened. Not breathless. Calm. Perfectly calm. Sienna looked at him, then at the 2 men behind him, then back. I assume Elliot isn't coming. Victor smiled, and Sienna understood. 4 guards hadn't lost 1 waitress. 1 waitress had walked directly into a trap. Victor Santoro had always been handsome, in the polished, expensive way that made wealthy customers trust him with credit cards, and employees distrust him with weekend schedules. Tonight, the polish looked different. Sharper. The smile didn't reach his eyes. Sienna stood near the wine cellar entrance and considered her options. Front door locked. 2 men behind Victor. 1 more near the service corridor. Possible exit through kitchen. Too far. Phone in her coat pocket. Maybe accessible, maybe not. And somewhere across the city, Nico Valenti was probably discovering 4 highly trained guards had failed to contain a woman whose greatest combat experience involved separating drunk bridesmaids. Sienna almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Victor gestured toward the cellar. She didn't move. He told her Elliot had created a tremendous inconvenience. Sienna tilted her head. That's an odd way to describe attempted murder. Victor's smile thinned. He explained. Elliot had discovered the financial network months ago. At first, Victor tried buying his silence. Elliot refused. Then he copied records. Victor found out. Elliot panicked and chose the least predictable person in the building to carry the access card. Sienna. Because everyone ignored waitresses. That part made Sienna angry. Not at Elliot. At how accurate it was. People looked through service workers every day. Ignored conversations happening beside them. Discussed affairs, fraud, business secrets, divorces and crimes, while Sienna refilled water glasses 3 feet away. Elliot understood something Victor hadn't. Invisible people noticed everything. Victor wanted the second access sequence. Sienna genuinely didn't have it. He didn't believe her. She told him his trust issues sounded exhausting. One of the men behind him almost smiled. Victor noticed. The man stopped. Sienna filed that away. He didn't control people through loyalty. He controlled them through fear. Different from Nico. Important difference. Victor led her downstairs. The wine cellar had been converted into a temporary workstation. Laptop. External drives. Documents. A portable server. Sienna stared. You brought an office to a kidnapping. Victor ignored her. He demanded the card code. Sienna told him the card was with Nico. Victor knew. He didn't need the card anymore. He needed Sienna's memory. Elliot had linked the final encryption to restaurant data only she could reconstruct. Reservation patterns, table assignments, employee numbers. Victor couldn't solve it because Elliot deliberately built the puzzle around the mundane details Victor never bothered learning. That almost made Sienna smile. The traitor who considered waitresses invisible had been defeated by a seating chart. Poetic. Victor opened the system. A prompt appeared. Sienna recognized the design Adrian had shown her. 3 attempts. She understood instantly. 3 wrong entries would lock the server and trigger a security notification because Adrian had added that protection after the first breach. Victor didn't know. Sienna looked at the keyboard, then at him. She needed time. So, she began talking. Not nervous babbling. Strategic babbling. Victor asked for the code. Sienna asked for water. He gave her water. She tasted it. Complained it was room temperature. Victor stared. Sienna reminded him she'd spent 11 hours serving wealthy people and learned kidnapping standards from professionals. One guard looked down to hide a smile. Victor's irritation grew. Good. Irritated people missed things. Sienna examined the files on the desk while appearing difficult. Saw names. Dates. Marchetti. Victor. Elliot. One document contained a photograph of Nico entering a warehouse. Another, a floor plan. Another, a schedule. Her humor cooled. This wasn't merely financial theft. Victor had been tracking Nico's movements, planning something. Sienna returned to the computer, entered the first wrong code. The screen rejected it. Victor leaned closer. She apologized. Nerves. Second attempt. Wrong again. Victor grabbed the edge of the table. Sienna looked at him. Pressure is not improving my performance. His patience snapped. He told her the third attempt had better work. Sienna smiled faintly. Inside, her heart pounded. Third attempt. She entered 7 random numbers. Pressed enter. The screen turned red. System locked. Security alert sent. Victor stared. Sienna leaned back. Huh. He looked at her. What did you do? Apparently, poorly. Then he understood. His face changed. Sienna stood quickly. Victor grabbed her arm. She winced. One guard moved. Sienna's fear became real now. No more playing. Victor demanded the reset. She didn't know it. He shook her once. Then, every light in Vesper went out. Darkness. Complete. The guards reacted. Sienna heard movement. Victor cursed. Emergency lights flashed red. Then the sound came. Not gunfire. Not shouting. the soft mechanical click of security doors locking. Victor released her. Footsteps moved upstairs. Slow. Measured. Sienna knew. Before anyone said his name, she knew. Nico. The cellar door opened. Marco entered first with 2 men. Victor's guards reached for weapons. Marco's people were faster. No dramatic shootout. No chaos. Just several seconds of controlled movement. Weapons removed. Men pushed against walls. Then Nico appeared. Black suit. No tie. Expression perfectly calm. That was when Sienna became frightened for Victor. Because Nico wasn't shouting. He didn't even look at the other men first. He looked at her. His gaze moved over her face, her arms, the place Victor had grabbed, then back to her eyes. "Are you hurt?" Sienna considered, mostly offended. Something in Nico's shoulders released. Very slightly. Sienna added, "And hungry." Marco looked at her. "You were kidnapped for 40 minutes. It was a stressful 40 minutes. Nico's mouth moved. Almost. Victor stepped forward. He claimed Sienna had come willingly. Nico turned toward him. The room became colder. "She left my house willingly." His voice was quiet. "That does not mean she agreed to be locked inside yours." Sienna stopped smiling. There it was again. Choice. Always choice. Victor tried another angle. He said Sienna had stolen confidential information. Nico glanced toward her. She raised one eyebrow. Nico looked back at Victor. "No." Victor laughed. "You trust her?" That question hung. Sienna suddenly didn't breathe. Nico's answer came immediately. "Yes." One word. No performance, no hesitation. Sienna felt something hit beneath her ribs. Victor continued. What if the leaked photographs went public? What if everyone believed Sienna had slept with Nico for access? What if her reputation collapsed? Nico's expression didn't change. "Release them." Victor paused. Sienna paused. Marco looked at Nico. Victor asked whether he understood what that could do. Nico did. His businesses, public image, political relationships, every rumor, every accusation. He didn't care. Not enough to bargain with Sienna's safety. If the price for keeping her safe is embarrassment. Nico looked at Victor. "Then embarrass me." Sienna stared. For once, there was no joke. Nothing. Victor had miscalculated. He believed reputation was power. For men like Victor, maybe it was. Nico's power didn't depend on being admired. He knew exactly who he was. That made him harder to manipulate. Victor's last defense collapsed when Marco placed documents on the table. They had traced the anonymous posts, management credentials, Victor's devices, payments, enough to expose him, but not everything. Sienna looked at the computer, the locked server, then at the table number records. Something connected. Elliot had built every clue through restaurant data, not because it was random, because it was information Victor underestimated. Sienna asked Adrian, who had entered behind Marco, to pull up Vesper's reservation archive. Victor went still. That was enough. Sienna saw it. There. At fear. She walked toward the terminal. Nico moved with her but didn't interfere. Reservation archive. 3 years. Hundreds of bookings. Sienna searched the false names from the payment files. Matches. Every meeting with Marchetti representatives. Different names. Same tables. Then she noticed a pattern. Private booth 6. Repeated. Victor always assigned that booth personally. Why? Because booth 6 had no standard camera coverage. Except, Sienna remembered something. Months earlier, the ceiling camera had malfunctioned. Maintenance temporarily rerouted footage through the kitchen inventory system. Everyone forgot. Victor probably didn't know. Sienna did, because she'd complained when the new angle caught employees stealing fries. Adrian found the archived feed. There, Victor, meeting Lorenzo Marchetti, passing documents. Another meeting, cash exchange, another, a flash drive, then the final file. Victor speaking with 2 men, audio weak, video clear. One man handed him a photograph of Nico. Victor pointed toward the service exit, then to a date. The date of Sienna's Saturday shift. Nico's face went still. Adrian enhanced the audio. Enough. Victor had planned an attack on Nico, at Vesper, that night. The assassins weren't originally there for Sienna. They were there for him. Then Elliot slipped the card into Sienna's apron. Victor's men noticed. The plan changed. They needed Sienna too, and when Sienna poked Nico's chest, she kept him in the dining room longer than expected. Nico noticed the men moving, changed exits, called security. The entire assassination timeline collapsed because Sienna had been tipsy and impatient, and Nico had been standing in front of the employee schedule. Marco stared at the evidence, then at Sienna. His expression became deeply thoughtful. So, technically, Nico looked at him. Marco continued anyway. Her poking you saved your life. Silence. Sienna slowly turned toward Nico. He stared at her. She smiled. A dangerous smile. No. Nico knew immediately where this was going. Sienna pointed toward his chest. I expect gratitude. Don't. I saved the Mafia boss. Sienna. Through advanced hospitality techniques. Marco laughed. Even Adrian smiled. Nico looked toward the ceiling for patience. Sienna folded her arms. I'd like that added to my employment record. Victor stood forgotten beside the table, while an entire criminal empire temporarily discussed Sienna's accidental heroism. It was perhaps the greatest humiliation of his career. Then Marco's phone rang. He answered, listened. His face changed. Everyone quieted. Elliot Crane had been found, alive, in an abandoned apartment near the river, injured, terrified, but alive, and willing to testify. Victor's conspiracy was finished. Nico's men took him away. No spectacle, no blood, just consequences. Sienna watched, then suddenly felt the adrenaline disappear. Her knees became unreliable. Nico noticed. His hand moved toward her waist, stopped, waited. Sienna looked at him. Then, for the first time, she stepped toward him. Nico caught her gently, not carrying, not commanding, just steadying. Her forehead rested briefly against his chest, the same chest she'd poked. The irony was not lost on her. Neither was the heartbeat beneath it. Strong, fast. Nico Valenti was nervous. For her. Sienna smiled against his shirt. You know. His hand rested lightly at her back. What? This is much nicer than being upside down. A breath left him, almost a laugh. Sienna looked up, and for one suspended second, the entire noisy, dangerous, ridiculous world narrowed to his face. Nico leaned slightly closer. Sienna did too. Then Marco cleared his throat. They separated. Sienna stared at him. Marco looked innocent. Again. Sienna pointed. You have terrible timing. Marco smiled. Occupational hazard. Nico said nothing. But when they left Vesper, his hand remained at Sienna's back. And this time, she didn't complain. 3 weeks later, Vesper reopened fully. The scandal surrounding Victor Santoro had burned bright and disappeared exactly as Sienna predicted. People became bored. They always did. Especially once the truth proved less romantic than the rumor. Victor had been arrested on financial conspiracy charges through federal investigators Nico had quietly supplied with evidence. Several Marchetti-linked businesses became part of the case. Elliot Crane entered protective custody and sent Sienna a handwritten letter thanking her. Sienna framed it. Not because she considered herself heroic, because the first sentence said, I knew you'd figure out the table numbers. She enjoyed being correct. Nico claimed he had noticed. Sienna accused him of jealousy toward stationery. Their relationship developed in the strangest possible way. Nobody officially announced anything. There was no grand declaration, no public claim, no dramatic Mafia ceremony. Nico simply began appearing. At Vesper, at Sienna's apartment, at lunch, at places where men who owned half the city presumably had more important things to do. He would arrive in an expensive car, walk into a tiny neighborhood bakery and stand in line because Sienna refused to let him skip. The first time someone recognized him and tried offering the front position, Sienna pulled him back by the sleeve. Nico obeyed. The bakery owner nearly fainted. Sienna bought cinnamon rolls. Nico claimed he didn't like sweets, then ate half of hers. She never forgave him. He also tried convincing her she didn't need to return to waitressing. Sienna stared at him for so long, he eventually revised the sentence. She wanted to work, not merely needed to. Vesper was hers in a way his mansion wasn't. Her co-workers, her routines, her stories, her independence. Nico understood. Eventually, he offered something different. An operations role, staff experience, training, scheduling, customer service oversight. Sienna laughed because she'd spent years telling managers how to fix things while they ignored her. Now the owner was offering her authority. She negotiated, aggressively. Marco attended the meeting. Halfway through, he whispered that Nico had faced union lawyers with less confidence. Sienna demanded better health benefits for restaurant staff, predictable scheduling, an emergency transportation budget for late-night employees, and paid training. Nico agreed. Then Sienna asked for her salary. Marco nearly dropped his pen. Nico stared at her. Sienna stared back. He agreed. Marco whispered, "You terrify me." Sienna smiled. Growth. Her life changed, but not completely. She still worked, still argued with Tessa, still visited her old apartment, even though she'd begun spending more nights at Nico's estate. That development happened accidentally. At first, one overnight bag, then skincare products appeared in his bathroom, then shoes, then a robe, then half a drawer, then another, Marco noticed. Of course, one morning, Sienna was eating breakfast at the estate when Marco casually asked whether she had moved in. She nearly choked. No. Marco looked at the slippers beneath her chair, her coffee mug, the cardigan hanging over the sofa, then toward Nico. Right. Sienna narrowed her eyes. I haven't. Marco nodded. Your toothbrush is visiting. Nico kept reading. Sienna pointed at him. Say something. Nico turned a page. Your toothbrush appears comfortable. Sienna stared. Marco laughed. Betrayal everywhere. Nico had changed too. Not dramatically. He remained intimidating. People still became nervous when he entered rooms. He still wore black 90% of the time, still conducted meetings with the emotional warmth of a judicial sentence. But Sienna discovered things. He liked terrible cooking competitions. He pretended not to. She caught him watching one at 11:30 at night. A contestant had ruined risotto. Nico looked genuinely offended. Sienna stood in the doorway. He immediately changed the channel. Too late. She never let him recover. He hated raisins. He owned 8 black suits that looked identical. Nico insisted they were different. Sienna laid all 8 across the bed and demanded evidence. He identified differences in stitching, fabric, and lapels. Sienna listened carefully, then announced they remained 8 identical emotional support suits. He refused to speak to her for 6 minutes. She timed it. He also couldn't handle sincere compliments. This became Sienna's favorite discovery. Sarcasm? Fine. Teasing? Easy. Flirting? Nico could return it quietly enough to make her knees unreliable. But if Sienna looked at him and simply said, "You're a good man," he froze. Every time. Because Nico knew how to respond to danger. Not tenderness. Sienna began learning that his coldness wasn't emptiness. It was discipline. A man who had spent years controlling every expression because people around him watched for weakness. Sienna didn't want his weakness. She wanted him. The man who repaired her shoe, protected Tessa without being asked, allowed 4 guards to become national embarrassments rather than lock Sienna inside a room. The man who told Victor to destroy his reputation before he'd bargain with hers. Nico discovered equally dangerous things about Sienna. She stole blankets, every blanket, without mercy. She sang while cooking, badly, confidently. She could not whisper. What Sienna considered whispering was simply normal speech with suspicious eyebrows. She collected snacks in places snacks had no reason to exist. Nico found crackers in the study, chocolate inside a guest room drawer, granola bars in his car. One evening, he opened a cabinet in his private office and discovered chips. He stared at them, then at Sienna. She claimed strategic reserves. Nico stopped asking. Rosa loved everything. Marco was worse. Tessa became unbearable. The romance grew between jokes. Nico held Sienna's hand in cars. She leaned against him during movies. He kissed her forehead when she became tired. She kissed his cheek whenever he looked too serious. The first real kiss happened quietly. No danger, no kidnapping, no enemies. Sienna was in the kitchen at midnight, attempting pancakes. Nico entered. She accused him of hovering. He denied it. She put flour on his cheek. He stared at her. She realized she'd made an error. Then he kissed her, slowly, carefully, giving her every second to move away. She didn't. The pancake burned. Neither cared. Rosa discovered the smoke later. She cared considerably. But even after that, Sienna kept one part of herself separate. Her apartment, her address, her key, her reminder that love didn't have to mean disappearing into someone else's life. Nico never pressured her, which somehow made the decision harder. Then came the night. Everything went full circle. Vesper had closed. Staff were finishing cleanup. Tessa counted receipts behind the bar. Marco sat at a corner table drinking coffee. Nico had stopped by after a late meeting. Sienna was reviewing next week's employee schedule, the new schedule, the one she now helped create. She turned toward the board and stopped. Nico stood directly in front of it. Black suit, black shirt, broad shoulders, exactly where he'd stood weeks earlier. Sienna stared. Tessa noticed. Then Marco. Then Kevin. Still Daniel legally, but nobody respected that anymore. Slowly, the entire restaurant became aware. Nico looked at Sienna. He knew. Of course he knew. Sienna walked toward him, completely sober, perfectly steady. Every eye followed her. Nico's expression remained serious. She stopped, looked up, then lifted one finger. Tessa covered her mouth. Marco smiled. Sienna poked Nico Valenti directly in the chest. The restaurant went silent. Again, Nico looked down, at her finger, then at her. Really? Sienna smiled. You're blocking the schedule. His eyes narrowed. You could walk around. That would undermine tradition. Somebody behind them laughed. Nico ignored it. Sienna poked him again. Move. Nico leaned closer. You have learned nothing. Oh, I've learned plenty. Such as? Sienna pretended to think. Your left shoulder is more comfortable than your right. Marco turned away. Tessa made a strangled noise. Nico stared. Sienna's confidence lasted exactly 1 second longer. Then she saw his expression change. Oh no! Nico stepped forward. Sienna backed up. Nico! Another step. She pointed at him. Don't! He continued. The employees were openly laughing now. Sienna backed around a table. This is a workplace. Nico moved around the other side. You started it. That defense would not survive court. He came closer. Sienna turned and ran. Not far. 4 steps. Maybe 5. Nico caught her around the waist. She squealed. No. Too late. The floor disappeared. Again. Sienna Brooks found herself over Nico Valenti's shoulder for the second time. The restaurant erupted. Actual laughter. Tessa leaned against the bar. Marco applauded slowly. Sienna lifted her head. Traitors. Nico started toward the exit. Sienna slapped his back. This is retaliation. You poked me. You were blocking things. You always say that. Because you're enormous. Nico kept walking. Sienna pointed at Tessa as they passed. "You're fired." Tessa laughed harder. "You can't fire me." Sienna looked toward Marco. "You're also fired." Marco raised his coffee. "I don't work for you." Details. The front doors opened. Cool night air hit Sienna's face. She laughed despite herself. Nico carried her toward his car. For once, there were no bullets, no assassins, no mystery, just ridiculousness. He lowered her beside the vehicle. Carefully. Always carefully. Sienna straightened her blouse, her hair, her dignity. Nico leaned against the car, watching, amused. Sienna narrowed her eyes. "You enjoyed that?" "Yes." She froze. That was new. No denial. She pointed accusingly. "You admitted it." "I've grown." She laughed. Then, something in her expression softened. Nico noticed. Sienna reached into her handbag, pulled out a small silver key. He recognized it, the key to his estate. He had given it to her 2 weeks earlier. No speech, no pressure. He'd simply placed it in her palm and told her she could use it whenever she wanted. Sienna had carried it ever since. Tonight, she turned it between her fingers. Nico's humor faded. Not because something was wrong, because he understood. Sienna looked toward the restaurant, then at him. For weeks, she'd joked that her toothbrush was visiting, that her clothes had accidentally multiplied inside his wardrobe. That staying 4 nights in a row didn't technically constitute living anywhere. Nico never argued. He waited. That was why she was ready. Not because he convinced her, because he didn't. Sienna slipped the key into her pocket. "I think I'm ready to stop pretending the toothbrush is visiting." Nico went still. There it was. That rare vulnerability. Sienna smiled. His voice was quieter. "Are you sure?" The question mattered. He had never assumed, never claimed, never turned love into a debt. Sienna stepped closer. Very. Nico looked at her for a long moment. Then his hand settled gently at her waist. Sienna placed both hands against his chest. "No poking this time. Mostly. I do have conditions." Of course she did. Nico waited. "My snacks stay." He nodded. "I control my side of the closet." Another nod. "You cannot complain about my singing." "That may be unreasonable," Sienna gasped. Nico almost smiled. She continued. "And I get 1 room with NO black furniture." Nico frowned. Now she'd gone too far. Sienna laughed. Then Nico kissed her. No audience. No danger. No reason except wanting to. The city moved around them. Cars passed beyond the street. Vespa's lights glowed behind them. And Sienna thought about the impossible sequence of events that had brought her here. A terrible shift. 2 cocktails. 1 blocked employee schedule. 1 extremely large man. 2 reckless pokes. A missing accountant. A black card. An assassination plot. 4 embarrassed guards. 1 mafia boss, who had somehow learned to laugh. If Sienna had been sober that first night, perhaps she would have simply asked Nico to move. Politely. Perhaps she'd have walked around him. Perhaps Elliot's card would still have been discovered. Perhaps Nico would have survived anyway. Perhaps everything would have happened differently. But life rarely became memorable through sensible possibilities. Sometimes, the ridiculous moment mattered. Sometimes the wrong decision opened the right door. Sometimes a woman spent years believing powerful men only knew how to take, then met one powerful enough to give her choice. And sometimes, apparently, a curvy waitress poked the most feared mafia boss in the city directly in the chest, only to discover that beneath the expensive black shirt and terrifying reputation was a man whose heart was considerably easier to reach than his employee's schedule. Nico pulled away from the kiss. Sienna looked up at him. A thought occurred. Dangerous. Nico saw it immediately. "No," she smiled. "I haven't said anything. I know that face." "What face?" "The one before you create a problem." Sienna looked offended. "I do not create problems." Nico stared at her. She considered the previous month. "Frequently." He opened the car door. Sienna stepped toward it, then stopped, turned, and poked him once more. Nico closed his eyes. Sienna grinned. "Drive me home, chest guy." His eyes opened. From inside Vesper, Marco's laughter could somehow be heard through the glass. Nico looked toward the restaurant. Then at Sienna. She was already climbing into the car, smiling. Safe. Choosing him. Nico shook his head. Then, for perhaps the 100th time since meeting Sienna Brooks, the most feared Mafia boss in the city, did something people around him still weren't used to seeing. He laughed and followed her home.